The media is a system. It's a system just like education is a system, just like the police are a system, just like, housing is a system. And so folks in the media have to tell a story. And I think the question really for folks in the media is, which story do you choose to tell and why? Because you have to make decisions. That happens in the editing room. That happens in the people that you choose to interview and why. So the media is an incredibly powerful system. And what concerns me largely about the media is that it's, I think, largely co-opted by government, and particularly partisan politics. That's become increasingly the case, at least with these established media sources. If there's any silver lining, it's that they've decided, hey, we're actually not objective. We actually do have biases, and we're going to tell you what those biases are. And so you can choose to listen to us if you like this particular slant, perspective, angle on things. So that's at least a little bit more authentic and transparent. But that in no means gives you a license to simply read the entire world through that lens, and to never critically assess whether or not your lens might be right. So media that doesn't take seriously their job to interrogate the ideological way that they see the world and that they tell stories, and that helps create and perpetuate and sustain racism and oppression, that's a problem. When the news goes out and tells a story about a homicide and chooses to do the interview in a school parking lot with the school's name in the back, that's a problem. Because they're not actually attending to the visuals. Or if they are, then they're being blatantly problematic about it. So the media has their job cut out for them. They got to be careful with their words. They got to be careful with their images. They got to be careful with their stories, because they can't be irresponsible about what they share. And the measure for that is like, hey, at some level, are you humanizing the world? Or are you dehumanizing the world? Are you moving people towards life, or are you killing people? Are folks becoming less violent or more violent because of the things you're showing? I think they really need to evaluate that. And they know, particularly marketers, they know how we work. They know what we look at. They know what sells. Folks that know that have a responsibility, and they should be held accountable for it. So the media is incredibly powerful, and folks in the media need to start talking to the media and calling themselves out on it. The role of the media is incredibly important because it also checks other systems, right? It's a check and balance for other systems that really lack transparency and accountability too. And so, I don't want to throw the entire media system under the bus, because they do an incredibly important service in holding account other systems. But yeah, there's a lot of work to do there. So there's a storyline about law enforcement, that's in these shows, cops and other things. There's a obsession almost with you about justice. There's a narrative of fear that runs behind that. There's an element of okay, something is wrong. We have to that tension gets built up to a climax, and then there's a resolution. And particularly we have characters that run through the story, or actors that run through the show, that are kind of the heroes and the heroines, or the key people, the key players. I think for American culture, and particularly American mythology, our view of justice is kind of like Superman, or like the Marvel or DC comics. There's this good and evil. It's binary. It's pretty straightforward. You're either good or you're evil. You can't be either. And to play on cancel culture is like, once that narrative's spun that you're evil, let's just cancel you completely out, right? You did a bad thing, or you are a bad person, you're canceled. Done. I mean, if that's not self-righteousness, I don't know what is, right? There's not one among us that is pure and good and has it all together and figured it all out. I think the difference is, how do you hold people accountable but not deny their humanity, and not to cancel them straight away, and particularly use the media to just deface and defame them, right? Yeah, so like the internet, the internet is relatively new. Phones, social media, that's all kind of new technology, and our world is responding to that. Stories, it's amazing. If something hits the news cycle, and then the next day there's like, everything's mobilized, like George Floyd, and that hit social media. And I think within like a day or two, I started to see like COVID masks with George Floyd's face on them. Like there were protests that had sprung up all around the country. There were policy shifts that were already started and pushes like, yeah, as a society, as a culture, we haven't had that kind of exposure before. This rapid fire, news-dominated, headline-dominated engagement with everything that's going on in the world, really, at the same time. And for me, I'll just talk about, me, that can be a sense of fatigue. Just, it's a lot to take in all at once, and not quite sure how to handle it and not quite sure how to prioritize, because I can't deal with everything all the time. It's tiring, and there's a sense of fatigue, but I'm super sensitive that there are communities that have dealt with this, particularly this narrative of suffering, in ways I never have. And I think there's a fragility with like white folks, white culture in general, that when things get uncomfortable, when we're exposed to suffering and hard things, just kind of shut down. Because we haven't had to develop the same kind of skills to be resilient. And furthermore, the kind of skills to actually stay engaged in the conversation and to do the work to understand it. Lazy culture, stuff happens, we read about it, take a couple seconds, check out the headline, move on, think we know what we know. Think we're now educated, we can have a conversation about it. I think that's tokenizing. I think that's super simplistic, and it's the easy way out. But having said that, no person can study everything all the time and be an expert on their own. So we have to rely on others who've gone before us and who we trust to help us through that. And I think that's where really people of color and white folks need to come together, because we need to help balance out what we're experiencing in the news with human interaction, personal engagement, and experience. 'Cause nobody has the whole story.